How did you go on that balancing walk when you were making it, but on the inside you did have some of that empty, alone feeling?
Oof. Well, yes. So we've spoken about, all the things that look fun on the outside. There is a whole other set of variables that are going on just day to day in the industry, in any industry.
Sure.
Just work hours alone. Young people working and rehearsing for 20 hours, and the training is intense. We're not talking just like sit here and learn how to cry on cue. It's like intense physical training plus visceral emotional catharsis, thinking about traumatizing things,
Yep.
and then like, really hands-on physical work. Again, I'm not saying this is the hardest job. It's just, it was actually way more involved than I think people understand from the outside
Yeah.
looking in. But then the aspect of having an audience is it's strange.
Sure. Yeah.
And so the audience may feel a connection to you, but you've never met them.
Mm-hmm.
But you become this sort of, I don't want to say target because that seems like it's automatically negative, but you become a chance for people to project whatever they want onto you. So to some, you're a hero. To some, you're a villain. To some, you are, so talented. To others, you are overrated and you should never be hired again. But when you're a child and you hear, actually, not exaggerating, millions of comments about who you are while you haven't formed your own identity yet
Mm-hmm.
or had time to experiment, it gets really confusing.
Yeah.
And a lot of the criticisms that I heard, of course, I think it happens quite frequently, especially for people like female-bodied people, body image-related criticisms, and like, why is Alyson getting hired? They're so ugly or whatever, which for an 8-year-old is like, ouch, like why?
Yeah.
Now I'm like, okay. And then you've got on the flip side people who are like praising you and almost inflating your ego.
Right.
And so it's just sort of like being in a space of extremes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like extreme work hours, extreme feedback, haters, fans.
Yeah.
And I think the toll for me was, manifold, but when it came to physical health, I should say all of this is happening, but we haven't even touched into what's going on in my personal life.
Yeah.
Because work took over so much. We haven't even gone into the fact that I'm raised by, there's multiple people dealing with addiction in my family, and multiple kinds of abuse going on at home. So you've got chaos at work, chaos at home. And just as a young person, your body's changing and you're like, oh man, like chaos in my body. And so I think the toll there was I started looking for, what do I have control over? What can I do to cope? And I chose a couple of things that weren't ultimately the healthiest. One, I obsessed over food and exercise. Two, I just dissociated as a survival strategy. I just went numb. I couldn't really feel anything, high, low, good, bad, none of it. And third, this was a mostly helpful thing. I sort of like dove into spirituality, but what I didn't realize I was doing at the time with spirituality and faith is that I was sort of looking for any out to escape the physical realm. It wasn't just this pure intention of wanting to connect with God or larger, spiritual experiences. I learned later in hindsight, oh, wow, you just had so much going on in here. You looked for every possible path to check out.
Yep.
So now all of those things have been kind of oriented, recalibrated. But it takes a lot when you haven't been feeling and then you start to feel a little bit and then suddenly you feel everything.
Well, thank you for starting to share that chapter of your life on the personal side. And I didn't tell you this before, but like I was an alcoholic. I've been sober for I think 16 months now. And so, yeah,
Whoa.
that's like big for me. But I came from a family that, My dad, I love him to death, but he was a big drinker. His
Mm.
dad, smoked a ton. Like, there's just
Yeah,
that addictive personality, the addiction in
totally.
our family. So I can understand that part of it.
Mm.
How was that challenging to hide? I don't know if hide's the right word,
Mm.
but you are probably back then, especially the way we talked about mental health back then, you don't want to talk about that with anyone, I'm
Right.
assuming. It was all zipped up.
Yeah.
How were you able to compartmentalize, and how tough was that? Because as a kid,
Yeah.
you see stuff and you like, I don't know, at home I thought stuff was normal because I
Right.
saw it.
Right.
But then you get out in the real world and you realize, oh, not everybody goes through this.
Yeah.
How did you compartmentalize that at that age?
I mean, that's a great question, and I don't think I had any of the answers, and I don't think that what I did was noble or right by any means. It was whatever my kind of survival strategy was for my brain and body. And compartmentalize is a great word. I do feel like I just learned to, because I also had a camera filming a lot of
Yeah.
my life, and so I couldn't tell anyone anything, even if I wanted to. But I don't know how it was for you in your household. In mine, no one wanted anyone else to know what was going on indoors. So you almost had to like uphold the family secret
Mhm.
anyway. But I think over time, I actually kind of believed that it was normal. Like you said,
Mhm.
that was my only reference point.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I saw my friend down the street whose family, they all like genuinely loved each other in a way that was palpable. And there was a glue that held them together. And I was like, like, what is that? Like, I just don't recognize this.
Mhm.
And so I started spending time with them, and that kind of became a model for knowing something else was possible. But I think in my household, the way I described it is we just all felt like islands. It was like self-governing islands. We all had our own coping strategies, defense mechanisms, governing laws, and like just stay in your world, disconnect, don't let anyone in, take care of yourself, don't rely on anyone. And it's sad because that shows up now in my relationships with friends and with partners.
Mhm.
They're like, it's okay for you to need us sometimes. And I'm like, no, it's fine. I'll do it.
Yeah.
So, and then I think, what we haven't named is just the amount of shame shame and fear just really drove my experience on a daily basis. I think that some of that's normal. You're
Mhm.
growing up and you're like, just trying to figure out what to do and how
Right.
to do it. But I think I had a lot of fear. I was afraid of emotions. I was afraid of messing up and failing. I was afraid of letting down my family and team. I was afraid of criticism, and then the shame of just like, if only anyone knew how painfully average and human I am. Like, oh no, this would be the end of it all, right? Just like drastic thoughts. And that fear and shame really drove me to some extreme choices.
Well, you mentioned the fear and shame, and you talked about the obsession with food and exercise, which you've been very open about, and I think it's helped a lot of people. And if I can dig into that just a little
Yeah.
bit, when did that start? Did it come from, we talked about the comments before and hearing from millions of people about your appearance or the way you look or sound. What played in and led to your eating disorder? You've talked about it a lot, and how that kind of led you to a rock bottom moment in your life. What drove you to that, you think?
There were a lot of factors, a lot of ingredients, and it made just the right recipe. One of them is disordered eating. I wouldn't necessarily say eating disorder, but disordered eating patterns and addiction were already present in my family, in multiple family members. So some of it's kind of modeled in how we relate to food, for emotional reasons and control, or for other reasons. Another aspect is, as a performer, the pressures with the industry, but also just like if you're an athlete or whatever, you can almost get away with a lot of behaviors and justify it as a part of the job, a part of the expectation. You are an elite athlete. You can't be anything less than, phenomenal
Mm-hmm.
and in tip-top shape at all times. And so in many ways, I use that to rationalize my obsessive behaviors. And, I was, trigger warning if anyone deals with this. I was restricting my intake with food severely while over-exercising tremendously.
Mm.
And for example, I would have a 10-hour dance rehearsal for a job, but I'd make sure to go to the gym before and after. So, and on top of that, not be fueling my body properly, all based on this fear of, things that were misperceptions I've now, of course, unpacked. So I think it was a variety of variables. And of course, there's just societal body image standards. And I think for those of us who find ourselves in these ruts, sometimes it's one catalyzing event and you can go back and say, oh, after that breakup, then this happened. But it's also, I think, sometimes just a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then you lean on a certain behavior once. It helps temporarily.
Yep.
And so you return to it a second time. Slowly it becomes a habit. Now it's a groove in the brain. Now your brain expects it. And your chemistry, organizes itself around it.
Yep.
And it leads to dependence. And the body, in some ways, you think the body's saying, oh, no, this is a legitimate need. I need this. And you've got to kind of unwire, rewire. And as you know, like, transition to sobriety, you're really, it's a biological, a psychological.
It's everything.
It's everything. And withdrawal symptoms are real and don't just happen with the substances that most people name. I mean, things can happen when you adjust your diet, when you are used to scrolling on your phone and you decide to remove that. Like, we all have these coping devices, and it doesn't have to be a formalized addiction that you hear about to be something that's interfering with, a balanced lifestyle.
For you, that started while you were what age, would you say?
So, yes, that's right. So I think the seeds of disordered eating were around 11, intensified by 13, carried through until around 17. And that's when I hit a version of rock bottom. I thought it would be my lowest, but it wasn't. And I knew I need treatment. I need to actually go to a facility. Like, I tried working with a dietitian. I tried to access therapy. I tried just also self-recovery forums and books. And I was like, man, this has me. It's got me. And so went into treatment for over 3 months, I believe. Much of that was on bed rest initially, which was hard. We weren't even allowed to stand for more than a few seconds.
Wow.
Or it was considered breaking the rules. So they were really just trying to get our bodies back in order. And a lot of us were just truly undernourished, malnourished, and needed that kind of intervention. Yeah.
Well, that experience you have, was there an audition? I think I read that maybe an audition that you had, that maybe, not blaming it on the audition itself, but kind of around that time at 18, you're making this transition from child star to the reality of trying to make it, your adult career. Did it kind of, those two come together, of that maybe identity crisis a little bit, or trying to prove to yourself and to the world that you can still do this as an adult? Do you think that factored into kind of that rock bottom moment?
Yes. I actually gave myself an ultimatum. And I recognized, it's hard for anyone on the outside to kind of understand what it's like, but the career phases for a kid actor are, the same to an adult who's at the same company for 30 years. All of that gets condensed into, like, okay, from 9 to 10, I'm establishing myself. From, 11 to 12, I'm making inroads. And by 13, I'm diversifying my brand and, starting new business verticals and da-da-da-da. And then by 17, you have to hit certain criteria in order to be able to make that transition. You've got to have some kind of big break, or you've got to have enough money in the bank account that you can sustain this awkward transition. And that's sort of the fear, right? It's like, I'm going to be forgotten, and all of this work that I've dedicated my life towards, like, I don't have any backup plan because I didn't get to go to school and
Yeah.
my family's falling apart. So like, like, what am I going to do if I don't succeed at this? Again, lots of fear. And so there was a particular audition. This one was for the movie The Hunger Games. And I was so familiar with the character, big fan of the books, and I knew that the character was written to be lean. She wasn't fully emaciated, but she was, she knew how to hunt, so she wasn't as hungry as some other people, but she certainly wasn't overfed. And so that kind of just sparked a little bit of the eating disorder mentality. And I said, okay, I see you, but I'm not going to fall for it.
Yeah.
I can, you know how it goes. Like,
Yeah.
I can manage this. And it turned out that the training that I put into the process just kind of, it was a slippery slope. And I found myself, very underweight again and struggling mentally, physically, starting to have all kinds of physical symptoms. And
Yeah.
and I was like, all right, I gave my all. And I understand why I did. I have compassion for that decision. And I knew if not this, then this is going to have to be a turning point of some sort.